Hi, my name's Rakesh. Thank you for watching this video, and today we're going to look at how to import libraries in Python's exec function. Just to give a very brief overview of what exec function actually is, so it's a built-in Python function and it's most commonly used to dynamically execute code either as a string or object code. And to properly understand how we use exec to import libraries, we just need to give a basic overview of the syntax, which is that exec has three parameters. It has object, locals, and it has globals. So object is the string or the object code to be executed. Globals is basically a dictionary of all available global methods and variables, and this is an optional dictionary. And locals is the same thing but on the local level. You don't need to know anything, take much from that other than the fact that it has these three parameters: object, locals, and globals, because we will use those, we'll refer to these later on in the video. Another thing just to bear in mind or to know about is that exec has some built-in functions that come by default. So it has some functions that we don't need to import, we don't need to download, they're there already, and we can get a list of all the built-ins with a simple print statement. We print out the directory, and there you go. So these are all the built-ins over here that come by default. So again, anything I want you to bear in mind is how we print it out using this print statement. And just as a quick view of how we can use the exec function, so I've just got a bit of code, and if I use exec to dynamically execute it, it will run through it and execute. So hello, my name is Rakesh. Okay, so given that exec has some built-in functions, what we're going to look at really is what happens if we want to use other modules, other libraries outside of these built-ins. We want to import them into exec and use them to dynamically execute code. Can exec handle this? The short answer is yes, which I guess is a good thing, otherwise this would be a very, very short video. So let's have a look at how we do that. I'm going to use the datetime module. It's part of the Python standard library, so the advantage is I don't have to download everything, but I do have to import it in order for it to run. So let's just confirm that. So I've got a print datetime statement. I haven't downloaded datetime, so I haven't imported datetime. So if I try to run this with exec, I get my error because datetime hasn't been defined. So how do we import our libraries? There are two main ways of doing this. We can use import within the code, or we can code string, or we can use import outside of the code string. The great thing is it's just a basic import statement as we would normally use. One of the things we're going to understand is whether we use it inside or outside the code string. So what do I mean by that? Let's start with inside the code string. So given our previous example, inside the code string means basically I'm putting it inside the code string. So if I import datetime like that, and if I now run exec, there you go, it works, and I get my datetime printed out. So not only has it worked, but if I now print out my directory of exec, I can see that datetime is now part of the built-ins. So what that means is that datetime, as you can see here, datetime was not available over here, up here, beforehand, but as I've imported it once, it's now part of the built-in. So I can now run another print statement and run it through exec without importing datetime at all, and it executes because it is part of the built-ins. Okay, so that was using it inside the string code, the code string, so import inside the code string. So what would happen if we actually tried to do it outside the code string? So let me just restart everything. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to clear my kernels, which basically means clearing all the output. So all the code that's been executed gets undone and we go back to our basics. So if I print out the directory now, you can see that there's no datetime module there. So outside of the code string, what I mean here, sorry, let me just get rid of this because we don't need that anymore. What I mean here is rather than having this import statement inside, I'm going to put it completely outside and not change anything else. Well, let me just to confirm this this doesn't work. Yeah, there you go. So the datetime module hasn't been imported. So what if I try to import it outside of the code string? for me, this shouldn't work because I'm not asking exec to import anything. I've clearly put this import statement outside, so it shouldn't work, but it does. Now, how does this work? What we have to do is we have to come back to this syntax of exec, and in particular, the globals parameter. One of the key things to understand about exec is that it provides access to anything within the scope of the program. So even if we're not specifically asking it to import this datetime, even if there's no mention of importing datetime, it will do it by default by using the global parameter. So what that means now is if I try and if I print out the directory, I can see that datetime has not only been imported for use within the program code, it's been imported as a default built-in. So I can now run it, print statement here, and it runs. This is all, bear in mind, being done despite the fact at no point in time have I explicitly asked exec to import datetime. So while this might not seem like a really big deal given what we're doing here, we're just importing datetime, we're just running it, as I hope you may be able to appreciate, it can raise some really serious security issues, because you could actually be giving people backdoor access effectively to your scripts, your files, your information on your computer, and we have to be very careful about importing with exec, and the way we do that is by using the globals and the locals parameters we've identified already and just trying to control it. So as we've said before, exec has the object, the globals and the locals, so let's see how we can use these to control our imports. So let me clear my kernel again, and what we'll start with by looking how we use the global parameter to control our imports inside the code when we use it inside the code string. So let's just clear this. Okay, and just to confirm, yeah, so datetime isn't there. So what we're looking at in this instance is we're going to say we want to import datetime inside the code string, but we're going to use our globals parameter to control it. So how do we do this? Well, we do this by passing an empty dictionary as the globals parameter. So by an empty dictionary, I'm not sure if you can see that, there's basically two curly brackets. And what that does, it actually restricts the datetime module from being imported as part of the global parameter. It will work now, so if I run this code, this works. You can see datetime works, but the key difference here now is if I now print out the directory again, what we can see is that datetime hasn't actually been imported as a built-in, so it's not there. It's available within our code string function, within the program here, but it's not available as a built-in. So what this would mean is if I wanted to access datetime outside, like in this little code here, it doesn't work because the datetime hasn't been defined. So that's how we can use it inside the code string. What about outside of the code string? So again, let me just restart this kernel. Okay, let me print out my directory, and again, so there's no datetime module there. So that was inside. Let's go back to outside. I'm going to use two modules here because I think it makes it a bit clearer. So I'm going to use datetime, and I'm going to use random. Random's another Python standard library, so I don't have to download anything, but I do have to import it to work. Okay, so, and I'm going to do a print statement. Random integer, print a random integer between 0 and 9. And again, so I've got my program here, and I'm passing an empty dictionary as a globals parameter. So let's see what happens. Okay, so there I have my error message. Datetime is not defined, so it hasn't allowed my code to access the datetime module. Now the key thing here is if I now print out the directory of exec, you can see that both datetime and the random library have in fact been imported. So I haven't been able to control the actual import of these two libraries, but what I have been able to do is control their usage or their access in this program code. So I haven't allowed any global libraries to be accessed within the program code. Now what this also allows me to do is actually stipulate the libraries I want to be accessed within the global code. So in this instance, if I said I wanted datetime to be accessible, but I want datetime to be accessible, if I define it in my global parameter, so I'm defining datetime as allowing datetime, but I still haven't said that I want random to be accessible here. If I do that, what it does is it allows the datetime module to be accessed, but not the random module. So hopefully what you can see there is that yes, I can't control the import when it's outside of the code string, but what I can do is I can control the accessibility of the libraries. So that was using the global parameter to control our libraries, but we can also use the local parameter when we're importing outside the code string. So again, let me clear the kernel just so we're starting from scratch. Let's just print that out to make sure it's done. Yeah, so no datetime module there. So what we're going to do here, I'm just going to take off this random because it's not relevant anymore. Okay, so we've said on this one we said that datetime could be accessed as a global parameter, but what we can do is actually override this by saying, well, actually on a local level, I don't want let's say I don't want any built-ins to be accessible. So I don't want any of them to be accessible, even though I'm specifying over here that datetime can be. So you can play around with this, and there you go. I get basically get an error. Conversely, I could override it the other way, and I could say actually I want the datetime module to be accessible locally, but nothing else. And there you go, that works. So I hope what you're seeing is that yes, you can use exec to import the libraries, and there can be an issue, but we can use these local and global parameters to actually control what exec has access to. Okay, so the final thing we're going to look at is providing global access to a local parameter. So I've got a bit of code here that is basically we're going to import datetime and try and print it within a function, but we're going to call exec from within another function. So I hope that makes some sense. So if I try to run this code, what I get is I get a name error because f isn't defined. The reason saying f isn't defined is because that's the first syntax error it comes to when it tries to execute it. But what has happened is that the exec function has actually imported datetime, but only locally, and I can confirm this by printing out my local directory over here. So just as we did the entire directory before, if I just print out the locals and run it, oops, what I can see is that my datetime module is actually part of my locals directory, but it's not global. So how do I pass it from a local directory to a global directory? Well, there's just a bit of syntax that does this, and I'm afraid I don't necessarily fully understand the logic behind the syntax, but we can pass something from a local directory to a global directory just by passing that syntax. So globals, and if I now run my code this time, there you go, it's worked. So I'm saying I want the local dictionary to be passed to the global dictionary, and that works. Again, so just to summarize, what we've seen is that yes, you can use you can import libraries with exec just with a simple import statement. You can put it inside or outside of your code string, but you need to be very careful because of the whole global parameters and because of the way the exec works. When it imports a library, it can become part of the built-ins, and it can have access to that anywhere within your code. It's not an issue for basic projects, not an issue when you're doing stuff by yourself, but as you maybe become more advanced, you can see that it can actually provide some access to people you don't want to access, and provide access to scripts and things you don't want to access to. So it's good to get a handle on it straight away initially and understand how it works. I hope this video makes sense, first of all, and if it has made sense, I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for your time.